When I was 19 years old, something really upsetting happened. My mom cheated on my dad with one of his close friends. This friend was about the same age as my dad, which made the whole thing even more painful. This betrayal was really tough on my dad. He was heartbroken because it was a double blow. His wife and his good buddy betrayed him. It hit him really hard, and he ended up struggling with depression and trust issues for a long time after that. My dad was so hurt that he stopped hanging out with his friends altogether and kind of shut himself off from everyone. During that tough time, I stayed close to my dad and helped him get through it. We got some professional help, and thankfully, with therapy, he started to get better and is doing okay now. But because of everything that happened, the last time I talked to my mom, I told her she was done with me, that I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. So, it's been about 8 years since I've spoken to her. Now, to make things even more complicated, my mom ended up marrying my dad's friend, the same one she had the affair with. And believe it or not, she even sent me an invitation to their wedding, which I thought was pretty bold and hurtful given everything that had happened. Recently, after all these years, my mom has reached out to me again. I haven't decided what to do about it yet. It's a lot to think about, especially after how things went down and how they affected my dad and me. Ever since the whole mess with my mom cheating on my dad, which really turned our lives upside down, I haven't wanted to talk to her. It was a really rough time for me and my dad, and honestly, just thinking about those days brings back a lot of bad memories. Because of all that, I decided a while back to block her number and even block her on Facebook, and I did the same with her husband too. One day, out of the blue, I got a letter from her in the mail. My first thought was to just rip it up and toss it in the trash. Why even bother, right? But something made me stop and decide to actually open it and see what she had written. In her letter, my mom said she really misses being part of my life and feels super sorry for all the pain she caused my dad and me. She wrote that over the years, she's tried a few times to talk to me about everything that happened, to explain things or apologize, but she couldn't reach me because, well, I had her blocked. Now she was asking if I could come over to her house to talk, just the two of us. She made it clear that her husband wouldn't be there. It would just be me and her. She seemed like she really wanted to make amends or at least explain her side of the story. I'm stuck feeling a bit confused about what to do next. On one hand, it's been so long, and she did put us through so much pain. But on the other hand, maybe there's a part of the story I don't know, or maybe, just maybe, there's a chance to clear the air. It's a lot to think about, especially considering how complicated and hurtful the past was. I'm really stuck on what to do next, and part of me just wants to keep being stubborn, like I have been for the last 8 years, where I've pretty much acted like my mom doesn't exist. I also want to point out that through all this, my dad has never said a bad word about her. Even though he was deeply hurt, he never tried to make me see her in a bad light. Instead, he became depressed, lost his trust in friends, and generally stopped trusting people around him. The affair wasn't just a brief slip. It lasted for years, right under my dad's nose, with both my mom and his friend deceiving him. After some intense therapy, my dad began to heal and open up, but I chose a different path. I cut my mom out of my life completely as my way to cope and move on. Now, though, she's reached out wanting to talk, and I'm considering meeting her because we never really had a conversation about everything that happened. I never gave her a chance to explain herself, and part of me is honestly just curious to hear what she has to say. It's weird. I'm just tossing these thoughts around, unable to decide. Part of me wants to maintain the distance, to keep guarding myself against more pain, but another part is wondering if there's something important she needs to say, something that might change how I feel. It's a tough call, and I'm just not sure what to do. Now for some comments before the update. It's a tough situation to be in. I'm sorry for what you and your dad went through. If I were you, I would think hard about it before making any decisions. I would try to figure out what are the pros and cons of this potential meeting with your mother. Maybe now she's realized what she's done. But that doesn't mean you have to forgive her. The ball is in New York court. If you want to meet and talk with her, go ahead. But if you don't, that's fine as well. You don't owe her anything. She may have been your mother, but after what you put you through, it's understandable. This is the best comment. You don't have to forgive your mother, and you do need to do what's best for you. But it is unhealthy to hold on to hate. Letting go of hate doesn't mean you have to forgive them and open your heart and trust them. But at the end of the day, you have to make that choice. I'm sorry you're even in this position. Take your time with the decision. Don't feel rushed when we are another. If your mom is wanting to reconnect, she can continue to wait patiently until you feel clarity. Given she's remarried and still with a fair partner, it's unlikely you could develop much or any connection with her alone. It's logical to assume she would want to incorporate a fair partner as well eventually. So if you want to meet and potentially reconnect, you might want to establish firm boundaries there indefinitely so you can remove them as you see comfortable moving forward. It might also be a good idea to have a mature conversation with dad before you reach your own decision. So he's fully informed, and then everything is out in the open, whatever you decide. If by any chance you decide to meet her, do not go to her home. Do it on your terms, a place and time. You feel more comfortable, and walk out if needed. I think the last place to have this talk would be at the house she shares with the man she cheated with. It can trigger some anger in you. This is hard. She has caused you and your father so much pain, and that's not an easy thing to deal with. With this whole situation, I feel like you've closed the door, but the problem is still on your doorstep, so to speak. I think talking to your mother would be good for you. You mentioned that your dad went through therapy, but did you do any for yourself? What did you do to help yourself? Speaking to your mother might give you some closure. I'm not saying you'll be hugging and singing happy songs by the end of it, but I think you may be able to successfully close that chapter of your life afterwards. Right now, you're just ignoring your mother while resentment stays rooted within you. And that's not healthy. Ultimately, the decision is yours. Do it because you want to and on your terms. I wish you the best. I'm a pessimistic person. My guess is your absence in her life is continued reminders that she destroyed more than her marriage. In my mind, she'll say or do anything to get back into your life. Overwrought apologies, heartfelt regrets, being sorry she missed out on so much of your life. Wanted to talk to you so many times so you could forgive her and that she could rest easier. It's not your responsibility to make her feel better for her actions. You owe no forgiveness just because someone has regrets that their actions had consequences. To be honest, I'd consider talking to a therapist to work through what your mother did to you so you can heal. I don't see healing coming from your mother. I see perpetuation of her bullcrap. I have experience with this. My dad cheated on my mom in 2001 when I was 23 years old. After 30 years of them being with each other. We were so close before this happened. I did not speak to him for the following 2 years. He reached out to me in early 2004 to tell me that he had cancer and would really like to talk to me again. I agreed and went to visit him in the state that he moved to. He died in August 2004, 7 months from when we reconciled. I'm happy that I put my anger on the back burner and did the difficult thing. I loved him and now see how flawed of a person he was. I never totally forgave him in my head or my heart, but I do know the level of grief I would still have had if he died without us ever discussing everything. Final update. Hey everyone, I really didn't think my post would get so much attention. I just wanted to share an update because, based on a lot of advice from you guys here, I decided to meet up with my mom. We agreed to meet in a public place because I thought it would be more comfortable, and luckily it was a nice day out. So we ended up going for a walk in the park just to talk things over. She gave me a heads up beforehand that her husband would be picking her up afterward, and I was cool with that. It didn't really bother me. When we met, one of the first things I noticed was that she wasn't making any excuses for what had happened. She just kept apologizing, again and again. I told her straight up that I almost didn't come to meet her. I made it clear that I wasn't there for her sake, but for my own. I needed to do this for me, to find some closure or understanding maybe. She seemed to get that. We found a bench and sat down just to keep talking. One big question I had was whether my dad had done anything wrong or if he had been abusive in any way, which might have led to what happened. But she was very clear in her answer. No, he hadn't. She admitted that she simply developed feelings for someone else and acknowledged that it wasn't an excuse for the years of deceit. It was a lot to process, and even though it was tough, I felt a bit lighter for having the conversation. I'm still sorting through my feelings about it all, but I'm glad I went. It was important for me to hear her side, even if it doesn't change the past. During our conversation in the park, I found myself confronting some deep feelings and memories. While my mom continued to express her apologies, I opened up about my own experiences and realizations from those difficult years. I remember telling her, "You lied to us. You lied to me too, not just to Dad." Reflecting on my teenage years, I've started to remember all these little moments that didn't seem important at the time but now feel so obvious. Like those times her ex-friend, now her husband, was over at our house when Dad was away. I look back and see how friendly you two were with each other, and I feel so foolish for not connecting the dots earlier. All these small memories that I never thought much about at the time suddenly make a lot of sense. I also shared with her how those years have shaped the way I think about that period of my life now, and I told her about the enormous pain Dad went through. He never spoke ill of her or her husband despite everything. But he struggled deeply with depression, to the point where I was genuinely scared I might find him gone one day, taken by his own hand. The betrayal by two of the closest people in his life, his wife and his best friend, had pushed him to the edge. In confronting these painful truths with my mom, I explained why I had made the decision to cut off all contact with her. It was what I felt was right, a necessary step for me to protect my own well-being and support my dad. I needed her to understand the impact of her actions, not just on him, but on me too. It was a hard conversation, but it was essential for me to express these things that had been weighing on me for so long. I made it very clear to her during our talk that my decision to cut ties was my own. I wasn't influenced by Dad. It was something I felt I needed to do for my own peace of mind. Given all that, one big question hung in the air. Why was she reaching out now after all these years? What did she want from me at this point? Her answer was simple but loaded with implications. She wanted to be part of my life again. I couldn't help but respond sharply. You should have thought about that while you were lying through your teeth for 5 years. It was hard for me to reconcile the warm memories I had of her and Dad's friend, who was almost like an uncle to me, with the betrayal they orchestrated right under our noses. We had even gone fishing together, him acting like Dad's buddy, all while entangled in lies and deception. I asked her, almost rhetorically, how could you manage it for so many years? She didn't have an answer to that. Much of our conversation was me expressing my feelings of betrayal and disappointment, although I made sure to let her speak her piece too. By the end of our talk, I told her firmly, I'm doing fine without you. I just wanted to meet you because I wanted closure, and I've gotten it now. She tried to assert that she was truly sorry, not just for getting caught, but for everything that had happened. She even said she'd do anything to at least have some form of contact with me. But at that moment, I laid down the only condition that might ever change my mind. The only thing that would ever make me consider having any contact is for you to make a choice. I left it at that, not fully elaborating, but making it clear that some significant gesture of goodwill or change on her part would be necessary for me ever to consider reopening our relationship. After hearing her out and saying everything that was on my mind, I finally laid out the ultimatum that had been building up for years. You already made your choice. Either divorce him or stay with him and go no contact with me. But I'm not going to force you to make that choice because you already made it. I wanted her to understand the weight of her decisions, not just on her life, but on mine too. I then told her, I feel I got what I came for, which was some closure, and you wanted to speak your piece. Now you have, and I still don't feel I want to have any contact with you. Just leave me alone. You made your choice. I needed her to know that while I wasn't angry, I also couldn't just go back to how things were. The damage was too deep and too much had changed. However, as I spoke those words, I could feel that I was being harsher and colder than usual. Anyone who knows me would say that acting this way is out of character for me. I saw that she was in tears by the end of our conversation. Despite everything, seeing her like that wasn't easy. I simply told her, live your life. It was a tough, emotional moment, one where I had to stand firm on my boundaries while also confronting the complicated feelings that come with family and betrayal. While I sought closure, I also had to manage the mix of relief and sadness that came with finally saying everything that needed to be said. I ended our conversation with a definitive line, and I will live mine, but I don't want you to be a part of mine. It was clear and final. There was no handshake, no hug, just a walk away from the situation, from her. And honestly, I feel like I made the right call. Throughout the entire meeting, I stayed calm. There was no yelling, no name-calling. Keeping my composure was important to me, even though it was incredibly tough. Seeing my mom in tears was hard. It's not something I take lightly or am proud of causing. But it was essential for her to understand the full impact of her actions, not just in the past, but on our future relationship as well. I needed her to know clearly why I chose to cut contact, and to ensure she understood that this wasn't just a spontaneous decision, but one I had considered deeply for a long time. Despite the emotional difficulty of the moment, I feel lighter and ready to move on. Some might have expected a full meltdown if I ever confronted her, but the reality was calm. There were no dramatics. I had been preparing for this conversation for years in my head, rehearsing what I might say, how I might react. Now she knows where I stand. Edit. I just wanted to clarify something important. My mom isn't blocked on Facebook or on my phone anymore. If she has anything else she wants to say, I'm open to listening. During our conversation, I did throw a lot at her, and it was pretty intense. Who knows, maybe one day I might feel okay about having some form of contact with her again, but for now I don't feel ready for that. I need some time to process everything and see how I feel as time goes on. Story 2. I punched my husband in the face, and I'm having a hard time taking all the blame. We were in a massive argument, like one of those where everyone's voice gets louder and the air feels tense. Suddenly, he stepped way too close to me, invading my personal space, and he used the upper part of his body to shove me. This caught me off guard, and I nearly lost my balance and fell over. I was really shaken up, so I told him, "Back off and stop it." But instead of listening, he just did it again. Now I wasn't just standing there not knowing what was happening. I was fully aware, but I was also filled with fear and anger because of how aggressive he was being. In that moment, something inside me clicked, and I reacted by punching him. It's not something I ever imagined I'd do. It's totally out of character for me. But there's more to this story. I should mention that in the past, I've been through some really tough times where I was seriously hurt by someone else. And this wasn't the first time he acted this way toward me, so now I'm stuck trying to figure out what to do next. This is a whole new situation for me, and honestly, it's overwhelming to think about all of this. After everything calmed down a bit, he was getting ready to leave, and he put all the blame on me. He couldn't believe I had punched him, and he said it was going to take a really long time for him to forgive me. When I tried to explain why I reacted the way I did, hoping he'd understand, he just wouldn't accept my explanation. According to him, what I did was far worse than anything he did, which just made everything feel even more complicated. Now I'm left trying to sort through all these feelings and figure out our next steps. It's a lot for anyone to handle, especially when you're still trying to make sense of your emotions and reactions in such a charged moment. I'm really struggling with everything that's happened, and it feels incredibly tough and complex. I understand that violence isn't the right response, and I acknowledge that, but I also think the things leading up to my reaction are significant. It's not okay for someone to invade my personal space, shove me, or call me names. These actions make me feel threatened and can trigger a defensive reaction, especially with my past abuse experiences. I'm frustrated because I'm being treated like I'm the abuser when I felt I was responding to being threatened. It's difficult because it's not just about who did what first. It's about a pattern of behavior that has made me feel unsafe. The dynamic between us is complicated, with my past trauma and our current issues intersecting. He has gotten in my face before, pushed me, and made me feel physically at risk. My reaction, while regrettable, came from a place of feeling cornered and needing to defend myself. This doesn't make my punch okay, but it does explain some of the reasons behind it. I think it might help to talk about these incidents with someone neutral, like a counselor or therapist. They could help me find safer ways to handle confrontations and work through my trauma responses, like the blackouts and flashbacks from my PTSD. As for whether I'm completely wrong, I don't think it's about being right or wrong in a situation as nuanced as this. It's more about understanding my triggers, how I respond, and how to manage them better in the future. I also need to think about why I'm staying in this relationship and whether it's good for my mental health and safety, considering my history. Reflecting on this could help me figure out what's healthiest for me moving forward. In the past, when things got really bad between us, he would take the blame. But not this time. I've never been the one to make the first move to hit, especially not in the face. This time, though, the mix of anger and hurt from being treated so poorly by someone I love, coupled with the fear and panic I felt, made me snap. I didn't hit him as hard as I could have. Not that it makes it okay, but I want to point out that it wasn't a punch thrown in pure anger. It was more out of panic, a sloppy reaction in a moment of fear. I've tried talking to him about this, explaining how I felt and what led up to that moment, but right now, I'm being painted as the villain. It's hard to tell if he's just playing games with my mind. I understand why I reacted the way I did, even though he was being aggressive too. But maybe he's right? I'm really trying to work out if I'm completely in the wrong here. They keep telling me I am, and it's weighing heavily on me. I'm searching for some clarity, trying to understand if my actions were totally unjustified or if there's some understanding to be found in the chaos of our conflict. Story 3. Grandmother gave my brother and me an equal share portfolio each when we were kids. Brother sold his when they were worth a car. I left mine in, and now they're a substantial amount. Brother and his girlfriend want my half now. When my brother was 16 and I was 4, my grandmother set aside a share portfolio for us. As soon as we were old enough, it was transferred into our own accounts, and it was only 4 years later that my brother dipped heavily into his and bought a new Honda. I knew about mine for much longer than he did before it became mine, and watched it grow since I understood what it was. By the time I was given full control, it was already worth a ridiculous amount because a big portion of it was invested in Apple, and I'm torn on using the funds locked up as they are because Dad drilled it into me to leave it to grow until I'm 40-something. I don't talk much with my brother. He's done some stupid things to the family over the years, and I didn't really grow up with him, so all I usually hear about his life comes through Dad. His new girlfriend works in law, though, and I've received a formal letter from them both that the investments my grandmother made were designed to be for both of us to use, not just for me alone, and his was only around $15,000. The number is right, but mine was only worth that at the time he spent it too. They want half of the value of mine now, and his girlfriend has informed me if I don't give them access, then the legal fees and fines would eat up my half and I'd be left with nothing. The dividends alone support a huge part of my life, and they've saved me a few times. If half of that disappeared, it'd set me back years. I know it sounds selfish, but I'm really used to having the extra income back me up when I've wanted to move. I've lived in 4 states by my own choice, and I want to move and take in more before I settle down, if I ever do. How likely is it they'll win and leave me with nothing? As far as I know, there was no paperwork or will, just my grandmother's word. She set up my brother's accounts when he turned 19, but she gave them to Dad at the same time as my brother got his, and Dad transferred the whole lot to me 6 years ago. For my share, I have all the logins, the trading accounts and bank accounts are in my name, and the shares are all solely in my name too. Should I find my own lawyer, and if I need one, what kind do I need? I have an accountant I've used for years, but this doesn't seem like an accounts problem, but a law one. Update. Mostly good news. I worked with my dad and got my own lawyer. I got the timeline of my shares wrong, but it comes out the same. What my brother and I inherited from my grandmother was originally part of my grandfather's portfolio. He was the money-savvy one. My grandmother looked after those after he died, and she personally set up my brother's accounts and gave him control of his part. She didn't do the same with mine before she died. I thought she had already set the accounts up for me and given control to Dad before passing. Instead, the shares were in her will, and she left everything she owned to my dad with instruction that what was $15,000 worth when my brother got his equivalent part would go to me when I was old enough to know how to take care of them. There was no trust. She just trusted my dad. My dad did the right thing and set up accounts for me and gave me control 6 years ago. My dad put some of his own shares in too as an extra leg up. Dad admitted to me he'd chewed out my brother last year when he came to him asking for money, and Dad had supported him several times over the years and got to the point he'd had enough. My brother found out I still had my investments because Dad had used me as an example of how brothers should have been using money. That's how my brother found out I still had shares and they'd grown. According to all that info, my lawyer tells me I'm in the clear, but it's not going to get to the point of finding that out in court, as my brother's GF was only a legal secretary. I say was because the firm she worked for apologized and informed my lawyer she was terminated immediately. The letter I received from them had been edited to put her name in a position higher up than it should have been, and some of the contact information had been changed. A week after she was fired, my brother visited me begging for money. His girlfriend is in serious debt, and she took a chance on scamming cash from me and lost. I felt awful rejecting my own brother over and over, and if he hadn't involved his girlfriend needing an amount well into 5 figures, I might have given him some. The next morning, I found all my tires had been slashed. Screw him. I don't feel bad anymore. The rest of the comments in the previous thread made me realize I don't know nearly enough about what I'm doing with the shares and dividends and money in general. A lot of the decisions I've made have been with Dad's help, and his advice has paid off well so far, but not because I knew it would, but because I had no idea what I was doing and left it up to him. I've booked in to work with a financial advisor to make the most of what I have. Thanks for all your comments. I learned that my mom is leaving everything to my golden child brother if she passes away. So I told her I'm tapping out of helping her. All right, so here's the deal. I'm the oldest kid of divorced parents, and my dad, he's got his new life now, remarried and off with a whole new family. My mom? She stayed single ever since they split, and she's not the type to ask for help from anyone but family. Specifically, me. She lives in a retirement community where she can be independent. But every time something goes wrong, guess who she calls first? Living close by, I'd probably have no issue popping over. But here's the thing. I live hours away. It's not like I can just swing by and lend a hand whenever she needs it. Every time she needs me, I have to book a flight, rent a car, figure out a way to be away from my own family and work for a few days. But even knowing all that, every time she calls, I show up, no questions asked. Now I do have a younger brother. He lives right in the same city as her, barely 10 minutes away. But does he help? Not really. He's around, sure, but only when he needs something from her. Money, usually. He stops by, does a few small favors, and when he's gotten what he needs, he's gone again. It's a routine I've seen so many times that I almost know his schedule with her better than he does. And even when he's there, I'm still the first person she calls if anything major happens. So there I am, constantly juggling my own life with the next call from my mom. It's become so common that my wife's already predicting what'll happen next. Mom will need something, my brother will be busy, and I'll have to drop everything to go help. And you know it's my mom, so I can't say no. I mean, who else is going to help her? It's not like she's going to ask my brother to suddenly grow up and take some responsibility. Last month, for instance, she had a minor car accident. Nothing too serious, but she twisted her ankle, and she's not exactly young. She calls me, all worried and shaken up, asking if there's any way I can come down. So I pack up my things, book a last-minute flight, and head down. When I get there, I help her with everything. Groceries, doctor appointments, you name it. She's grateful, of course, and it feels good to be there for her, but I can't help but notice that she's still got that soft spot for my brother. Every time he comes up in conversation, she talks about him like he's some sort of hero, even though he barely shows up. So, as usual, I just brush it off. I tell myself, well, that's just how it is. I'm the one she calls because she trusts me, and my brother's the one she gushes about because, honestly, I don't know. Maybe she thinks he needs it more. Maybe she feels bad for him. Either way, it's always the same. I'm the one doing everything, and he's the one getting the praise. One evening, I'm at her place, just finishing up cleaning the kitchen after making her dinner, when my phone rings. It's my wife, checking in on how things are going. She knows the drill at this point. We talk for a bit, and she can tell I'm getting frustrated. You know you don't have to be the one doing everything, right? She says. Maybe it's time to let your brother take some responsibility. I want to believe that's possible, but I know it's just not realistic. I've tried talking to my mom about it before, suggesting that maybe my brother could handle some of these things, but she always has an excuse. Oh, he's got so much going on, she'll say, or he's just not as responsible as you. Every time it's like she's convinced that he can't handle the pressure, so it has to be me. And I'll admit, there's a part of me that feels good about being the one she relies on. It's nice to feel needed, even if it means constantly putting my life on hold. But then, there's this other part, the part that's just tired. Tired of missing out on my own family's life, tired of burning through my savings to pay for all these last-minute trips, and tired of pretending that it doesn't bother me when my brother gets away with doing so little. Then, right on cue, my brother shows up. He didn't come to the hospital when she had the accident, didn't check in while she was at the doctor, but here he is, stopping by now that she's back home and settled. He strolls in, acts like he's just here out of concern, but I know better. Within minutes, he's hinting at some financial trouble he's been having and how he could use a bit of help. And she falls for it, every single time. My mom doesn't hesitate. She reaches into her purse, pulls out a couple of bills, and hands them over like it's nothing. I'm standing there, watching this whole thing go down, and I can feel myself getting angry. Not even because of the money. I mean, it's her money, she can do whatever she wants with it. But because it's just so predictable. I'm the one who flew across the country to help her, and he's the one getting rewarded. After he leaves, I try to bring it up with her, gently, but she just brushes it off. He's had a hard time lately, she says. He's just figuring things out. I don't push it. I just nod, pretending to understand, and go back to cleaning up the dishes. And it's not that I want her to cut him off or anything. He's her son too, and if he needs help, fine. But it's this feeling that no matter what I do, I'll always just be the one who does the work, and he'll always be the one who gets the praise. Before I leave that night, I make sure she's got everything she needs. I double-check the fridge, stock her up on groceries, and remind her to take her meds. She thanks me, gives me a hug, and I feel that familiar guilt mixed with pride. Because even though it's exhausting, I know I'll keep doing it. I don't know how to be anything but the good son. The one who's always there to help, no matter how inconvenient it is. But there's this part of me that wonders if she'll ever really see me as more than just the reliable one. After that last visit, I head back home, figuring I'll be able to settle back into my own life for a bit. But of course, it doesn't take long before the next call comes. My mom's voice is on the line, and she sounds stressed. Turns out my brother's visit drained her bank account again. She's calling me, saying she's in a bit of a pinch until her next pension check comes in. This is becoming a pattern. Every time he's around, it's the same deal. He stops by, sweet-talks her, gets whatever cash he needs, and takes off. And I can't even say anything about it without her defending him, saying, oh, he just needed a little help. Or, he's trying his best. And every single time, she leans on me to pick up the slack afterward. I know it's her money, and she's free to do whatever she wants with it. But it's just frustrating to watch. I mean, here I am, doing everything I can to make sure she's okay, and yet I'm the one covering for him. He's not putting in the same effort, yet she doesn't see anything wrong with the whole situation. So, I transfer her some money, enough to keep her going for a bit. And yeah, I feel bad about it, because this is money that could go toward my own family, my own kids, or even just something for myself. But what am I supposed to do? Let her struggle? I can't. I know I'll keep helping her, even if it leaves me stretched thin. Because honestly, I don't know how to be anything but the reliable one. A few days later, I call her to check in, just to see how she's doing. She sounds better, telling me about her week, about how she's managing things. I'm glad she's doing okay, but then she starts talking about my brother again. She mentions how he stopped by, hung up a few pictures for her, and brightened her day. I'm just standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to her go on and on about him, like he's some kind of saint. Part of me wants to laugh because the guy is barely doing the bare minimum, and yet he's treated like a hero for it. Meanwhile, I'm the one covering bills, making trips, arranging her medical stuff, and what do I get? A quick thank you, and back to talking about him. So I decide to try bringing it up. I ask her, Mom, don't you think maybe he could do a little more? He's right there, and he could help with the day-to-day stuff instead of just popping in when he feels like it. She goes quiet for a second, then sighs and says, You know, he's just not as reliable as you. I can't count on him the same way. But I'm so grateful I have you to depend on. It's like a slap and a hug at the same time. Sure, she trusts me more, but she's still not expecting him to step up. I don't argue with her. It's not worth it. I just say, Yeah, I get it, and change the subject. But inside, I feel this mix of frustration and resignation, like I'm stuck in a role I didn't exactly sign up for. And the thing that really gets to me, I know that the next time my brother needs money, she'll give it to him without a second thought, and then she'll call me to help when she's stretched thin. A couple of weeks pass, and just as I'm settling back into my own routine, she calls again. She needs help with some medical bills that insurance won't cover, and she's worried she won't be able to make it through the month. I ask her if my brother's pitched in, even knowing what her answer will be. Oh, he's got his own struggles right now, she says. He's trying to find a better job, which, let's be real, is her way of saying that he hasn't done a thing. I take a deep breath and tell her, All right, I'll help you out again. She thanks me, and I can hear the relief in her voice, which honestly makes it worth it, even if I'm grumbling a little inside. I'm not angry at her, really. It's not her fault that my brother's always taking advantage of her kindness, and I guess in her mind, she thinks he'll grow out of it eventually. But that's the part that bugs me the most. She's waiting for him to turn into someone who's reliable, someone like, well, me. But I know it's never going to happen, at least not as long as she keeps bailing him out. After that call, I go to my wife, who's been watching all of this unfold with that mix of understanding and frustration that only she could manage. I tell her what happened, and she just sighs. You know she'll never stop helping him, she says. And you'll never stop helping her. She's right, of course. I'm stuck in this cycle where I can't say no because if I don't help, I know she'll be the one who suffers. And my brother? He's got it all figured out. He knows she'll give him whatever he wants, and if he leaves her broke, I'll be the one to step in. It's strange, really, how different the two of us turned out. He's just a couple years younger than me, but the gap between us feels like a lifetime. I work hard, have a family of my own, and take pride in doing things the right way. Meanwhile, he's floating through life, relying on our mom to keep him afloat. And somehow, she still sees him as this struggling kid who just needs a little help. I start thinking back to all the times I've come through for her, all the sacrifices I've made over the years. I've missed work deadlines, burned through my vacation days, skipped out on family events, just to be there when she needed me. And I don't regret it. I love my mom, and I know she appreciates it, even if she doesn't say it as much as I'd like. But there's this nagging feeling, this question that keeps popping up in the back of my mind. Does she even see the difference between us? Does she understand what I've done for her? Or is she just too blinded by her soft spot for him? I try to shake off the thought, convincing myself it doesn't matter. She's my mom, and if she needs me, I'll be there. It's as simple as that. But as the weeks go by, that thought keeps creeping back, and I start wondering if this will ever change. A couple of weeks go by, and I'm starting to think maybe things will calm down a bit. But, as always, the peace doesn't last. I get another call from my mom, and right off the bat, I can tell she's stressed. She's talking in that worried tone she always uses when she's about to ask me for something. Sure enough, she mentions that she's running low on cash, again. She doesn't come right out and say it, but it's clear my brother's been by recently. It's almost like clockwork at this point. He shows up, drains her wallet, and leaves her in a bind. And then I get the call. So I'm listening to her go on about how she feels bad asking and how she knows it's a lot to keep leaning on me. But then she says, I know I can trust you. You're so dependable. You've always been there when I needed you. I don't know if she's trying to guilt trip me or if she genuinely believes that I'll always be there to pick up the pieces. But either way, I give in. Again. I don't know why, but this time it hits differently. I'm sitting there, looking at my bank app as I transfer some money over to her, and there's this feeling of frustration that I can't shake. It's not even the money itself. It's not like I'm broke, but it's the principle of it. I'm putting my hard-earned money toward fixing her problems while my brother takes from her with zero accountability. After I send the money, I decide to give her a call. I'm trying to keep my tone light, not wanting to sound like I'm accusing her of anything, but I feel like I need to get something off my chest. Mom, I say, I've been thinking, maybe you could talk to him? You know, let him know that he needs to be a bit more careful with what he's asking from you. You're on a fixed income, and it's tough for you to keep covering for him, right? She pauses, then lets out this sigh like I just don't get it. Oh, he's just going through a hard time right now, she says. He's trying his best, really. He just needs a little help. I can feel my frustration building, but I try to keep my cool. Yeah, but Mom, it's like every other week you're telling me you're running low because of him. I'm just saying, maybe you could set some boundaries, you know? Another pause, then she starts in with her classic line. You don't understand, he's not as strong as you. He needs more support. And then she adds, almost like she's saying it as a compliment, I don't have to worry about you because you're so responsible. But he's just not like that. I don't even know how to respond to that. It's like she's seeing him through this lens where he's always the one who needs help, no matter how much damage he causes in the process. And meanwhile, I'm just dependable, reliable, the one she can fall back on, even if it's at my own expense. After I hang up, I sit there for a while, trying to process what she said. There's this weird mix of anger and resignation swirling around in my head. I know she doesn't mean to put me in this position, and I know she probably thinks she's doing the right thing by helping my brother. But it's like she's blind to the fact that he's just taking advantage of her. And what bugs me the most? She seems blind to the fact that I'm here, always here, doing what I can, and all it earns me is a quick thank you and a pat on the back before she goes back to worrying about him. I try to shake it off and move on with my day, but it's eating at me. And then, as if the universe itself is pushing me to confront this, I get a call from my brother that same evening. Now, this is rare. We don't exactly talk often, and when he does reach out, it's usually because he wants something. But I pick up, figuring maybe he actually wants to talk about Mom and work things out. Wrong. He starts off with a casual, hey, how's it going? But it doesn't take long before he's complaining about how hard things have been for him lately, and then he hits me with it. Do you think you could loan me a bit? Just for a couple weeks, man. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. I almost laugh. Here's this guy, who's been milking our mom for everything he can, now coming to me, probably because he's wrung her dry. I don't lose my temper, but I decide it's time to call him out a bit. Look, man, I say, I'm not trying to be harsh, but don't you think maybe it's time you found a better way to manage things? Mom's struggling, and it's tough for her to keep giving you money all the time. I've been helping her out too, but it feels like you're not really pulling your weight here. He doesn't take it well. He gets defensive. Starts saying things like, oh, so now you're judging me? You don't understand what it's like, and how he's trying to figure things out. It's like listening to my mom talk. Honestly, the same excuses, the same deflections. And I realize right then and there that nothing I say is going to make a difference. He's comfortable. He's got Mom to rely on, and if she can't help, he knows I'll be there to catch the slack. I end the call as politely as I can, but the whole thing leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Here I am, bending over backward to keep everything running smoothly, while he gets to waltz through life with no real consequences. And the worst part? My mom lets him. That night, I talk to my wife about everything. I tell her about my conversation with Mom, the call from my brother, all of it. She listens patiently, nodding along, and finally she says, You've done more than enough for them. It's okay to set boundaries, you know. They'll survive without you. I know she's right, but it's hard to let go. There's this part of me that feels like if I don't help, then I'm abandoning them. I've always been the one to step up, to be there no matter what, and admitting that maybe, just maybe, it's not my responsibility to fix everything. That's tough. But her words stick with me. I start thinking about all the things I've missed out on because of this sense of duty I've felt. All the weekends away from my own family, the vacations I've canceled, the nights spent worrying about my mom's finances instead of focusing on my own. And for what? So my brother can keep treating her like his personal ATM? I know something has to change. I can't keep putting myself last, can't keep sacrificing everything for people who only see me as the dependable one. And as much as I hate to admit it, I think it's time I finally start setting some boundaries, even if it's not easy. Because at the end of the day, I deserve to live my own life too. So, after that whole conversation with my brother and the talk with my wife, I decide to try something different. I tell myself I'll start setting some boundaries with my mom, just small ones at first. I'm not going to abandon her or anything drastic like that. But I figure it's time to stop jumping at every single call. It starts with me waiting a bit longer to reply to her messages. Normally, the second she texts me, I'm replying, sorting everything out for her as fast as I can. This time, I let a couple of hours go by. I know it sounds small, but for me, that's a big deal. And sure enough, the minute I don't respond right away, she starts sending these little follow-up texts. Is everything all right? And, I hope I'm not bothering you. The guilt creeps in, but I keep telling myself that it's okay to take a breath, that she can wait a little bit. When I finally do reply, I keep it brief. I don't offer to help with anything she didn't directly ask for, and I try to keep the conversation casual. And surprisingly, she's fine with it. She doesn't push, doesn't ask why I took longer than usual. It's like maybe she can sense that something's shifting, or maybe she's just relieved I'm still there, even if it's in a smaller way. But then, a few days later, the next test comes. My mom calls, and she's got that stressed out tone again, the one that usually leads to her asking for money. She says she's been having trouble covering a few unexpected expenses and asks if I could help out just this once. Now, I know better than to believe it'll be just this once, but still, I pause. I think about all the times I've bailed her out, all the times I've covered for my brother's financial messes, and I feel that familiar frustration rising up again. So I try something new. I say, Mom, I can't keep covering for you whenever things come up. Maybe it's time to have a serious talk with him about helping you out more. I'm half expecting her to get defensive or to brush it off, but she goes quiet instead. For a moment, I think maybe I've actually gotten through to her. But then she says, I don't want to stress him out. He's going through a tough time. It's the same old story. She doesn't want to pressure him, doesn't want to make things harder for him, and here I am, the dependable son who's supposed to just understand and pick up the slack without a fuss. So I take a deep breath and tell her, Mom, I'm always going to be here for you, but I can't keep doing this alone. It's not fair to expect me to handle everything while he just floats by. She sighs and says she'll think about it, which, let's be honest, is probably her way of saying she won't. After we hang up, I feel a weird mix of emotions. Part of me feels guilty for not immediately stepping in, but there's also this tiny sense of relief. Like maybe, for once, I actually set a boundary and stuck to it, even if it wasn't exactly what she wanted to hear. Over the next few weeks, I keep up with the boundaries, trying to find a balance between being there for her and not letting myself get sucked into the same old routine. My mom seems to adjust, though I can tell she's not thrilled. She still calls, still needs help, but I'm keeping it at a manageable level. I'm trying to take my wife's advice and focus more on my own family. And honestly, it's nice. For the first time in a while, I feel like I'm not completely stretched thin. Then, just when I'm starting to think this might actually work, I get a message from my mom's close friend, someone I haven't spoken to in ages. She says she wants to catch up, but I can tell there's more to it than that. She's not the type to just reach out of the blue. We meet for coffee, and after the small talk, she brings it up. She says, I thought you should know that your mom's been talking about her will lately. She's making some final decisions about everything. I nod, not thinking much of it, figuring it's just the usual stuff. But then she says, she's planning to leave everything to your brother. I'm sitting there, trying to keep a straight face, but inside, I feel like I just got hit by a truck. Everything? She's leaving everything to him? After all these years of me being the one who's there for her, taking care of everything, it's all going to him? My mom's friend, seeing my reaction, says, I thought you should know. I know how much you've done for her, and I thought you deserved to hear it. I don't even know what to say. I just nod, pretending to be fine, but my mind is racing. She's leaving everything to him, the same guy who only shows up when he needs money, who leaves her in a bind every time he's around, who I have to cover for. And me? I'm the one she calls when she's in trouble, the one who's always there to pick up the pieces, and she's giving everything to him? After I leave, I sit in my car, just processing it all. There's this mix of anger and hurt that I can't shake. It's not even about the money. I'm doing fine on my own. It's the fact that, despite everything I've done, she still sees him as the one who deserves it all. She still sees me as the dependable one who doesn't need anything from her, while he's the one she wants to take care of. For the next few days, I try to act like nothing's wrong, but every time I think about it, I feel that same bitterness creeping back. I've sacrificed so much for her, for both of them, really, and it feels like none of it mattered. All those missed family events, all the stress, all the money I've poured into helping her. It's like it's all invisible to her. Finally, I can't take it anymore. I call her, trying to keep my voice steady, and I ask her point blank if it's true that she's leaving everything to him. There's a pause, and then she says, "Well, yes, he needs it more, and you're doing fine, aren't you?" I don't even know how to respond. I sit there listening to her talk about how she just wants to make sure he's okay, how he's always struggled more, and how she knows I'll be fine. And all I can think is, after all this, she still doesn't see what I've done for her. She's still blinded by this idea that he's the one who needs her most, and I'm just the reliable backup. I don't argue with her. I just tell her that I understand and that I'll still be there if she needs me. But after I hang up, I feel like something's finally snapped inside me. After hanging up with my mom, I just sit there, staring at my phone. There's this weight in my chest that I can't shake, a mix of anger, hurt, and, honestly, a bit of confusion. It feels like everything I've done for her, all the sacrifices and the times I dropped everything to be there, meant nothing in the end. She's leaving everything to my brother, everything. And here I am, the one who's been the responsible, reliable one, expected to just be okay with it because, according to her, I'm doing fine. The next couple of days are a blur. I go about my usual routine, but everything feels off. I try to ignore it to tell myself that it doesn't matter. It's just money, right? I'm financially stable and I don't actually need her inheritance. But it's not about the money. It's about the fact that she sees him as the one who needs it more. That she still sees me as someone who's got everything figured out and doesn't need a thing from her. One night, I'm sitting at the dinner table with my wife, and I finally tell her everything. I tell her about the will, about how my mom's planning to leave everything to my brother. She just listens, nodding along, and then she sighs. "You know," she says, "you've always been there for her. You've been the one keeping everything together. And maybe she's so used to it that she doesn't realize how much it's cost you." Hearing her say that just makes the frustration bubble up even more. Because yeah, I've sacrificed so much. All those times I left my own family to take care of my mom, the money I've spent helping her when my brother left her with nothing, the vacations I've skipped because she needed me. And what do I get? Just the role of the dependable son who can fend for himself. I think back to all the times I've watched my mom hand my brother money, excuse his behavior, and praise him for the bare minimum. I've always brushed it off, convinced myself that it didn't matter. But now, it's like all of it has built up, and I can't ignore it anymore. A few days later, my mom calls again. She's chatting away, telling me about how my brother came by to visit and helped her fix a few things around the house. She goes on about how nice it was to see him, how he's trying so hard to get his life together. And I'm sitting there, listening to her go on about him like he's some kind of saint, and I can't take it anymore. "Mom," I say, interrupting her mid-sentence, "can we talk about the will?" There's a pause, and I can tell I've caught her off guard. She stammers a bit, then says, "Oh, well, I didn't think it was something we needed to discuss. You're doing well, aren't you?" I take a deep breath, trying to keep my tone calm. "It's not about the money, Mom. It's about the fact that you're leaving everything to him, after all the times I've been the one helping you." She sighs like I'm the one causing her trouble. "He needs it more than you do. You have a family, a steady job, a life that's going well. He's still struggling." I feel this wave of frustration, but I push through it. "And you don't think that maybe, just maybe, I'd like some recognition for everything I've done? For all the times I've been the one there for you, the one taking care of things?" There's a long silence. Finally, she says, "I didn't realize you felt that way, but well, he's always been different. He needs more support, and I just assumed you didn't." Hearing that hits harder than I expected. It's like she's saying I don't need her, that I've never needed her, and all I'm good for is to be the one who's there when no one else is. I tell her I need to go, that I'll talk to her later, and I hang up. That night, I sit down and really think about what I want. I've been bending over backward for my mom and my brother, but for what? They've both made it clear that they see me as the one who doesn't need anything, the one who can take care of himself. And honestly, I'm tired of it. The next time my mom calls, she's asking me if I can help with another little expense. Apparently, my brother's been struggling again and she's short on cash. I take a deep breath and for the first time I tell her, "I can't keep doing this, Mom." She's silent, like she didn't expect me to actually say no. Then she asks, "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continue, "that I can't keep bailing you out every time he takes from you. I have my own family, my own responsibilities, and I can't keep putting you and him ahead of that." She starts to protest, going on about how it's just this once and how he's trying so hard. But I don't let her finish. Mom, he's been trying for years. I've been the one there for you every time. But if you're going to keep giving everything to him, maybe he should be the one to take care of you. The line goes quiet, and for a moment I think maybe I've finally gotten through to her. But then she says, I didn't realize you felt this way. I thought you understood. And that's when it hits me. She's never going to change. She'll always see him as the one who needs her most, and she'll always see me as the one who's strong enough to handle everything without a second thought. After that call, I make a decision. I'll still be there for her, but I'm done putting my life on hold to clean up their messes. I'm done sacrificing my own family time, my own money, just to keep them afloat. I'm finally setting the boundary that I should have set years ago. Over the next few weeks, she tries to reach out a few times, asking for help here and there, but each time I stick to my guns. I tell her I'm busy, that she should ask my brother instead. She doesn't like it, and I can tell she's frustrated, but I know it's for the best. For the first time in a long time, I feel this sense of relief. I'm finally letting go of the weight I've been carrying for years, the weight of always being the dependable one. And yeah, it's bittersweet. There's a part of me that wishes things were different, that maybe she'd see the value in everything I've done. But now, I'm focused on my own family, my own life. I'm not waiting for her or my brother to appreciate what I've done, because I know that day's never coming. And as hard as it is to accept, it feels good to finally put myself first. I don't know what the future holds with them, but for now, I'm okay with that. Last update. After keeping some distance from my mom and brother, I think things might finally be settling down. But then, out of nowhere, I get a call from my aunt. She's someone I don't talk to often, so it takes me by surprise when she starts the conversation with, I'm so sorry for what's happening with your mom. Confused, I ask what she means, and that's when she drops it. Apparently, my mom's been going around telling everyone that I've abandoned her. According to my aunt, my mom has been spinning stories to the family, saying that I've left her to fend for herself, that I've turned my back on her, and that she has no one she can rely on except, of course, my brother. She's making it sound like I'm heartless, too busy with my own life to care for her. And, to add insult to injury, my brother's been backing her story, making little comments to family members about how he's doing everything he can to support her, even though we both know he barely lifts a finger. I feel this familiar anger boiling up, but it's mixed with something new, betrayal. All this time I'd been breaking my back to help her, doing whatever I could to keep things together, and she's going around acting like I just cut her off? I realize it's not just about getting more help from the family. It's about guilt-tripping me back into my old role. She wants me to hear these rumors, to feel guilty, and to come running back like nothing's ever happened. But this time, I'm done. Instead of calling my mom or brother directly, I decide to take a different approach. I reach out to a few family members individually, the ones who've been most supportive and have seen a glimpse of the situation over the years. I explain everything, laying out the full story, the sacrifices I've made, the money I've spent to keep her afloat, the countless times I dropped everything to help her out, and how my brother has only ever been around to take. I even share a few texts and emails as proof, showing how often she's leaned on me and how my brother's barely done anything to help. The response is immediate. Family members start putting two and two together, realizing how much they've been misled. My mom's story starts to unravel, and within a week, word has spread through the family that things aren't exactly as she and my brother have made them out to be. My aunt calls me again, saying she had no idea it was that bad, and a few others apologize for believing the sob story without hearing my side. My brother tries to do some damage control, but by now it's too late. People have seen the proof, and no one's buying his "I've been the supportive one" act. My mom doesn't contact me directly, but through the grapevine, I hear she's furious. She's upset I exposed her to the family, as if I'm the one who betrayed her, not the other way around. With everything out in the open, I finally feel free. I don't need to justify my boundaries anymore, and I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next guilt trip. I cut ties with both of them, making it clear that I won't be part of their games anymore. My phone is quiet for the first time in years, and I'm actually able to focus on my own life, my own family, without constantly feeling pulled back into the chaos. But despite everything, I still feel a pang of guilt, knowing my mom might struggle financially now that I'm not around to bail her out. So I decide to set up a small, anonymous monthly deposit into her bank account, just enough to cover essentials. It's not much, and she'll never know it's from me, but at least I can sleep a bit easier knowing she won't be left completely high and dry. And, in a way, it's a relief. I'm able to help her without letting myself get pulled back into her manipulative tactics, without giving her the satisfaction of knowing I'm still there in the background. I'm doing it on my terms this time, not because she pressured me into it. As time goes on, the family drama fades. My brother tries to reach out a couple of times, probably hoping to rekindle things now that he's lost his main source of financial support, but I ignore him. The rest of the family respects my decision to step back, and for the first time, I feel truly free. I don't have to play the role of the dependable one anymore. I'm just me, and that's enough. Parents handed over the house I bought to my sister, so I stopped paying and it got sold. All right, so here's how it went down. Picture this. I'm 28, working my butt off in tech, living frugally, sharing an apartment with two roommates to save every penny. I wouldn't call my parents poor, but they've never been financially stable either. My folks have had their fair share of money struggles over the years, my dad especially, always switching jobs, sometimes laid off, trying different things to make ends meet. They've always been on the edge of being okay and just barely scraping by, if you know what I mean. Growing up, my sister Perry and I didn't exactly have the same treatment. She's 3 years younger, and man, she's always been the favorite. They let her do whatever she wanted, like she could never really do any wrong. She dropped out of high school, didn't have any plans to go to college, and pretty much floated around, doing odd jobs here and there. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. My parents always had these big expectations for me, always hinting that I had to be the one to make it, because Perry, well, she wasn't going to. So they stretched their savings thin and took out loans to get me through tech school. They made it clear that this was my shot to make something of myself, and they were counting on me to pull through. They were upfront about how they sacrificed for me, how they could have spent that money on themselves or saved it for retirement, but instead, they invested in my future. And honestly, I didn't see anything wrong with it back then. I figured, yeah, they're just doing what any parent would do. They wanted me to succeed, right? So I kept my head down and worked hard, thinking, one day I'll pay them back and everything will be fine. After tech school, I landed a good job. It wasn't anything huge, but it was enough to start saving and paying back some of the student loans, which honestly was a weight off my shoulders. I'd send them some money here and there. Not too much because I was still setting up my own life, but enough to help out. Every time I sent something, Dad would remind me of the big sacrifices they'd made, hinting that there was still more they deserved. This was mostly through subtle comments like, don't forget where you came from, or remember who got you here. Real subtle. But I got the message. Then one night, I'm back home visiting for a few days. It's the first time I've been able to take some real time off, and we're sitting around the dinner table just talking. Out of nowhere, Dad brings up how they're still renting and how it's tough not to have a place to call their own. He talks about the rent hikes, the noisy neighbors, how tiring it is to move every few years when the lease is up. Then he looks straight at me and says, we're just wondering when we can stop living on rent and finally settle down, you know? I kind of laugh it off, thinking he's just venting, but then he goes, you should think about buying us a place, son. You're doing well now. We've done our part to get you here. I'm sitting there, halfway through my meal, just blinking at him like, wait, what? It hit me that they were dead serious. My mom chimes in, all supportive, saying, it would really mean the world to us, a place we can call our own. You're the only one who can make that dream come true. In that moment, I felt trapped. They were right there, staring at me, and I didn't know what to say. On one hand, they did pay for my education and support me growing up. But on the other hand, buying a whole house for them? I'd just started my career, and here they were, talking like I should already have enough saved up to buy them a house on top of my own expenses. I tried to laugh it off, saying, Dad, I'm barely paying rent myself. I can't afford a house for me yet, let alone for you guys. But they brushed it off with a smile and this knowing look, like they believed I'd figure it out eventually. Over the next few months, they kept dropping hints. Every phone call, every time I'd visit, there'd be a comment like, it would be so nice to settle down somewhere, or all we want is a small place, nothing big. And they'd follow it up with the usual reminders about sacrifices, how they didn't have a choice but to drain their savings for my school, how much they went without. I couldn't even argue with them. Everything they were saying was true. They had put everything into my future, and they did make sacrifices. But it started to feel like they weren't giving me a choice either, like they were pushing me into a corner. Guilt was their tool, and they wielded it well. Eventually, I caved. After years of saving and cutting back, I managed to scrape together enough for a down payment. I wanted to do it for them, partly because I felt I owed them, but also because I thought it had finally put an end to all the guilt trips. So, I bought them a house. Nothing crazy, just a simple place in a quiet neighborhood, but it was theirs. I was still sharing an apartment, but I thought, this is a good thing. They'll finally be happy, and maybe now they'll let me live my life. For the first few months, they were thrilled. Every call I got from them was about how great the house was, how comfortable they felt, how proud they were to finally have a place to call home. They showed it off to their friends and family, and for once, it seemed like the constant pressure was lifted. They had their house, and I was finally free to start focusing on my own goals. But as much as I thought it would create distance, it didn't. The house only got brought up more. Mom would mention how they were making it a true home and all the little upgrades they wanted, hinting that it'd be great if I could help out with those costs too. Dad would remind me of the mortgage payments, saying how we're all contributing to make this happen. It felt like every time I'd call, there was something new they wanted to discuss about the house. Still, I kept paying the mortgage, sending extra money whenever I could so I could close it off sooner. My life was just work, save, and repeat, but it felt like I was working towards something good. After all, I'd made their dream come true, right? I thought that was what mattered. But every time I'd look at my own savings, I'd get that sinking feeling. I was still just getting by, making all these sacrifices for a house I couldn't even live in, while they sat comfortably in what was supposed to be our accomplishment. So, now that my parents had the house, I figured things would finally chill. I thought they'd back off a bit, you know? I mean, I'd done something pretty huge for them, but the whole favorite child thing with my sister Perry just kept creeping back in, and it was like the more I helped, the more they leaned on me. I kept telling myself it was no big deal, but I was starting to feel more like a wallet than a son. Perry's always been treated differently, even though it's obvious to everyone but my parents. Growing up, she was never held to any standards. She dropped out of high school, got into stuff that didn't really pan out, and kind of drifted from job to job. But in their eyes, she was just finding herself, or exploring her options. They always found a way to paint her choices in some forgiving light, while I was told to stay focused, work hard, and basically make something out of myself so I could support the family. When I was in high school, it was pretty clear who they were betting on. I got drilled about my grades, career plans, and any move I made. Meanwhile, Perry could bring home F's on her report card, and Mom would tell her that not everyone's cut out for school. She could do no wrong, and I was the one expected to set the example. They saw me as their insurance, the one who would go out and make sure everyone was taken care of. Perry was like the family pet, except, she got everything handed to her. So here I am, paying for the house while they're treating it like it's her space too. I didn't think too much of it at first. After all, it was technically their house, so if she wanted to come over or stay for a weekend, it wasn't really my business. But then I'd get these weird comments from my parents about how Perry really loved the new place, or how she'd been staying there for days at a time. They even started talking about how great it would be for her to settle down nearby. That little hint just kept popping up every time I'd visit or call. Every single conversation with them started turning into some variation of, "It's so good for Perry to have stability nearby." They'd say things like, "Maybe she could live here while she figures things out." They'd say it in a casual way, like it was nothing big, just something to think about. But I'd worked my ass off to buy that house for them, not to fund a place for Perry to crash whenever she felt like it. A few months in, I realized that her little visits weren't just visits anymore. She was practically living there. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I asked Mom about it directly one day. She gave me this vague answer, something like, "Oh, well, she's just here helping us out around the house." Helping with what, though? Every time I'd visit, Perry was there, just lounging around like she owned the place. One weekend, I decided to pop by unannounced. I hadn't told them I was coming because, well, I wanted to see for myself what was really going on. I get there, and it's not my parents who open the door. It's Perry. She's wearing pajamas, looking super comfortable, like this was her place. She seemed surprised to see me and actually asked, "Oh, what are you doing here?" As if I was the one intruding. I remember just standing there, a little stunned, trying to process why she was acting like she'd been there for weeks. I go in, and the whole house is set up with her stuff everywhere. There were clothes and bags and makeup strewn around. It was like she'd moved in, no question about it. I ask her, "Where are Mom and Dad?" She shrugs, saying they're out shopping or something and won't be back for a while. I sit down trying to play it cool, but inside I'm fuming. We sit in this awkward silence for a few minutes, and I just can't take it anymore. I go, So, are you staying here for a bit? She just shrugs again, saying, well, it's a nice place. Mom and Dad don't mind me hanging out here. I wanted to tell her off, say something like, yeah, well, maybe I mind, but I knew that would blow up into something bigger. So instead, I just nodded, biting my tongue, trying not to lose it right there. When my parents came back, I brought it up casually, saying something like, hey, I didn't realize Perry was staying here. They just laughed it off, saying she needed a place to stay for a while because things weren't working out with her roommates. I knew exactly what that meant. She'd probably gotten kicked out or couldn't pay her part of the rent. But of course, my parents would never actually say that. To them, it was just another harmless little adjustment in her life. Nothing was ever her fault. That night, we all sat down for dinner, and the entire time, they kept praising her for helping them out around the house. I couldn't believe it. They were acting like she was some kind of hero for being there, while I'm the one actually paying for the place. Every time I tried to bring up something related to the house, they'd steer the conversation back to Perry, how good it was for her, how she was finally getting her feet on the ground, and how this was just what she needed to get on the right track. It was like I wasn't even part of the picture anymore. They were making this house about her, as if my sacrifices didn't exist. After that night, I couldn't shake this feeling that I'd been duped. I didn't sign up to buy a house for Perry. I bought it for them, thinking I'd be giving them security. But it started feeling more like I was financing Perry's new life. I left that visit feeling frustrated, like I'd walked into a trap I didn't even know was there. It was becoming clearer that my parents had a blind spot the size of a house when it came to Perry. I couldn't help but feel like I was being taken advantage of, and it was getting hard to ignore. The next time I talked to my parents, they dropped another bomb on me. They started talking about how settled Perry seemed to feel in the house and how great it would be if she had her own space. I tried to laugh it off, saying, well, she's got to find her own way eventually, right? But they just looked at me with these blank stares, like I wasn't getting it. And I realized then that they had a different idea about what her own space meant. All right, so here's where things went completely off the rails. After that last visit where I'd walked in on Perry just lounging around the house, I figured she'd be moving out soon. Or at the very least, she'd help out if she was planning to stay longer. I thought maybe she was just crashing there temporarily, like we all do when we're going through something. But a couple of weeks later, my mom calls me up, all casual, and drops a bomb on me. They'd actually moved out. Yeah, you read that right. My parents moved out of the house I bought for them, and Perry had moved in full-time instead. I sat there, phone in hand, trying to process it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, I bought that house specifically for my parents, thinking it would give them the stability and peace of mind they deserved. And now, out of nowhere, they just handed it over to Perry. No heads up, no conversation, just a casual announcement like I'd have no problem with it. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, why would you move out? This house was for you and Dad, not for Perry. My mom just laughed, brushing it off like it was no big deal. Oh, honey, we needed a fresh start. Besides, Perry needs the house more than we do right now. She's trying to get her life together, and having a stable place to live will help her a lot. She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most logical thing in the world. She's trying to get her life together, she explained, like that justified everything. She needs stability, especially if she's going to have a family someday. I was just sitting there, stunned, trying to wrap my head around what she just said. Stability? What about the stability I'd been working toward? What about all the sacrifices I'd made to make sure my parents had a decent home to live in? And now, out of nowhere, Perry was just taking over, and they hadn't even bothered to ask if I was okay with it. Finally, I asked them flat out, so, are you saying Perry's living there full-time now? And what about the mortgage? Who's paying for that? My mom's tone shifted, sounding almost defensive, like I was accusing her of something. Well, honey, you're doing well for yourself now, aren't you? It shouldn't be a big deal for you to keep paying a bit longer. Besides, she's family. There it was, the you're doing well line again. As if my hard work and all the sacrifices I'd made meant they had free access to whatever I'd built for myself. I tried to keep my cool, but it was like a slap in the face. I said, Mom, this isn't what we agreed on. I bought that house for you and Dad, not for Perry to live rent-free while I cover the bills. She sighed, sounding exasperated like I was the one being unreasonable. We thought you'd understand. She's struggling and she doesn't have the same opportunities as you. You've always been the responsible one, and we're just asking you to help a little longer. At that point, I was barely holding it together. Help a little longer? Mom, I'm paying for the entire thing. It's not a little help. I've been paying extra every month to get this paid off faster, thinking it was for your stability. Now you're telling me you just handed it over to Perry without even asking me? My dad chimed in then, trying to sound calm and reasonable, but he came off more patronizing than anything. Son, we didn't think it'd be such a big deal. We know you're financially stable, and Perry could really use this. It's just until she gets back on her feet. Gets back on her feet? I said, my voice rising despite trying to keep it in check. She's been getting back on her feet her entire life. When does it stop being my responsibility to fix everything for her? They just sat there, looking at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Finally, my mom said, "Well, maybe we shouldn't have assumed you'd be so willing to help your own family." The way she said it, like I was the bad guy, just hit me hard. It was like no matter what I did, they'd always find a way to turn it on me. I got up to leave, saying, "Look, this needs to change. Either she pays her part, or you guys do, but I'm not just footing the bill for Perry to live for free in the house I'm sacrificing everything for." They didn't respond, just looked at each other like they were disappointed in me, as if I'd let them down somehow. Driving home, I felt more frustrated and betrayed than I ever had before. They'd pulled this move, blindsiding me with a decision that impacted my life in a huge way, and then they had the nerve to make me feel guilty for not wanting to just go along with it. It was like all my hard work and everything I'd done for them meant nothing. Back at my place, I tried to calm down, thinking maybe I was overreacting, that maybe I was being selfish for wanting a little say in how my money was being spent. But the more I thought about it, the more it sank in that I wasn't being unreasonable at all. I mean, who just hands over a house that someone else is paying for without even asking them? What kind of parents do that? And what kind of sister just moves in without offering to help out, without even considering that maybe this wasn't fair? I felt like I was at a crossroads. If I kept going along with this, what was next? Would I be expected to fund every little thing they decided to hand over to Perry just because I was doing well? Would I always be the backup plan, the one they could depend on whenever they needed money? I thought back to all the years I'd worked to get here, all the sacrifices I'd made. I'd spent my life trying to make them proud, working my way up so I could give them a better life. And now that I'd done it, it was like I was just a resource to them. Not a son with his own dreams, but a wallet. And Perry? She wasn't even remotely grateful. It was just expected that I'd step in and fix things for her whenever she needed it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep paying for everything without setting some boundaries, or this was never going to end. If they saw me as their financial safety net, they'd never stop taking, and I'd never be able to live my own life. So I made up my mind. I was going to have to set some hard limits, even if it hurt them, even if they didn't understand. Because at the end of the day, I'd spent too long sacrificing everything for a family that saw my success as theirs to spend, and I deserved better than that. After that last call, it was clear I had to make some tough decisions. The whole situation had gotten out of control, and if I didn't set some hard limits, they'd keep taking from me until I had nothing left. My parents had moved out without a word, turned my house into Perry's place, and had the nerve to use my extra payments to cover their rent. They didn't see a problem with any of it, and that told me they'd keep pushing until I put my foot down. I took a couple of days to think it through. I wanted to approach this calmly, not just come in guns blazing. The plan was simple. I'd tell them I wasn't going to keep sending extra payments, and if Perry wanted to live there, she needed to start contributing to the mortgage or move out. It was time for some real boundaries. So, I called my parents and told them we needed to talk face to face. They weren't thrilled, but agreed, and I headed over to their new place. The tension was thick when I arrived, and it was obvious they knew what this was about. We sat down, and I didn't waste any time getting to the point. "Look," I started, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "I found out from the bank that the extra money I've been sending hasn't been going toward the mortgage. I don't appreciate being kept in the dark about where my money's going." My dad tried to wave it off. "It's not a big deal. We needed the extra to cover rent since we moved out for Perry. You're doing well, we didn't think you'd mind." That "you're doing well" line again. I was so sick of hearing it. They used it every time they wanted something from me, like the fact that I'd worked hard somehow made it my job to fix all their problems. I took a deep breath and replied, "But I do mind, Dad. I bought this house for you, not for Perry. And the extra was supposed to pay off the mortgage faster, not fund a second place for you. I can't keep doing this." My mom gave me that disappointed look she'd perfected over the years. "Honey, Perry needs stability. She doesn't have the same opportunities as you. We thought you'd want to help your sister." I was so frustrated I could feel my patience slipping. "Mom, I'm already helping. I bought the house. I've been paying the mortgage. And I even sent extra. But Perry's an adult. If she wants to live there, she needs to contribute. This isn't fair to me. Dad shook his head, looking annoyed. You're being selfish. We've done so much for you. Isn't it time you gave a little back to the family? I felt my temper rising, but I kept it together. I am giving back. I've been giving more than enough. But I have a right to set limits, and right now, the limit is that I'm only paying the minimum mortgage from now on. If Perry's staying there, she needs to pitch in, or she has to find somewhere else to live. They both looked at me, clearly unhappy, but I didn't back down. I'd rehearsed this in my head so many times that I knew exactly what I needed to say, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into caving. This isn't about not caring, I added. It's about fairness. I worked hard to get here, and I deserve some respect for that. I'm happy to support you guys, but not like this. My mom sighed and tried one last time. We thought you'd understand. Family takes care of each other. Family also respects each other, I replied, feeling more firm than ever. I've done everything I can to support you, but I have to draw the line somewhere. I need to focus on my own life too. If Perry wants to stay, she needs to help out. If not, then I'll figure something else out with the house. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. They weren't used to me talking like this, and I could see they didn't know how to react. My dad eventually muttered, "We'll talk to Perry." It was obvious he wasn't happy, but he realized I wasn't backing down this time. I left, feeling drained but also relieved. For once, I'd stood up for myself without feeling guilty about it. I didn't know what they'd do or what Perry would say, but at that point, I didn't care. I'd done my part, more than my part, and it was time they started respecting that. Over the next few days, I heard nothing from them. No calls, no messages, just silence. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, but every time I replayed the conversation, I knew I'd done the right thing. I'd been bending over backward for years, and it was finally time to put my own needs first. Then, one afternoon, my mom called. Her voice was calm, almost resigned. She told me they'd talked to Perry, and she'd agreed to start contributing to the mortgage. Just a small amount, but it was something. She sounded disappointed, like she still couldn't believe I'd actually asked for it, but I didn't let it bother me. That's good to hear, I said, keeping it short. I didn't want to drag this out or get into another guilt trip session. I was just relieved that for once, they'd actually respected a boundary I'd set. Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was relieved, yes, but also sad. I never thought it had come to this, having to argue with my own parents just to get them to respect what I'd worked so hard for. But I knew it had to happen. If I didn't stand up for myself now, this would be my life forever, constantly giving, constantly being expected to cover everyone else's mistakes. In the weeks that followed, things were quieter. They didn't push as much, and there were no more sudden changes I wasn't told about. For once, I felt like I was actually living my life for myself, not just as a backup plan for everyone else. I won't say everything's fixed. I know they still see me as the responsible one they can lean on, but at least now I've drawn a line. And if they cross it, I won't hesitate to remind them of where that line stands. It took me years to get here, and I'm not going back. After that last talk, I knew it was time to walk away. I'd tried everything, reasoning with them, setting boundaries, even offering a compromise to keep things fair. But no matter what I did, it always ended up the same. They saw me as their safety net, not as their son who also had his own life and goals. So I made the decision I should have made a long time ago. I stopped paying the mortgage. I was prepared for the fallout. The calls started almost immediately. At first, it was my mom calling every day, sometimes multiple times a day, leaving these long-winded voicemails about family obligations and how disappointed they were in me. She'd remind me of all the things they'd done for me growing up, making it sound like I was some selfish jerk who'd abandoned his family. Then my dad joined in. His voicemails were sharper, more frustrated. He'd say things like, "We raised you to support your family. We thought you'd always be there for us." But to be honest, I was numb to it. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I'd given them everything I could, and they'd taken advantage of it. This wasn't my problem anymore. Eventually, when I kept ignoring their calls, they ran out of ways to reach me, but that didn't stop them. They started calling from different numbers, sometimes even borrowing friends' phones to try to catch me off guard. I'd see an unknown number pop up and hesitate, just in case it was important. But sure enough, it'd be another voicemail from my mom, going on about how family doesn't abandon each other, trying to guilt trip me right back into covering the mortgage. But this time, I wasn't having it. I blocked every number I could recognize, and when new ones popped up, I blocked those too. I think what hit me the hardest was realizing that, for them, this was normal. To them, family meant I'd endlessly give, no questions asked. It never crossed their minds that I might have my own life, my own dreams. They couldn't see me as anything other than a bank account with a voice on the other end of the line. With no one covering the mortgage, things
Emily, this house, it was always meant to be mine. Sign the divorce papers and leave. Nathan's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth that once drew me to him. I stood in the living room, the walls echoing his harsh words, feeling a mix of disbelief and rising anger. Our marriage, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a battlefield. You can't be serious, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. This is our home, Nathan, not just yours. He smirked, a gesture so unlike the man I had fallen in love with. Our home? Emily, wake up. You're just a housewife. I've been the one paying for everything. I clenched my fists, feeling a storm brewing inside me. A housewife? Is that all I am to you now? I retorted. Nathan walked closer, his presence overbearing. Exactly. You've done nothing but live off my hard work. It's time you realize your place. I could feel my parents' worried glances from the corner of the room. They had come over for dinner, unaware they'd be witnessing the collapse of my marriage. I didn't want them to see me like this, broken, belittled by the man I once adored. Fine, Nathan, I said, my voice laced with a newfound resolve. I'll sign your papers. But remember this, you will regret it. He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Regret? Emily, you'll be the one with regrets. I turned away, my parents following silently. As I walked out of that room, out of the life I had built with Nathan, I knew this was not the end. It was a beginning of my fight, my retribution. As I sat in my small but cozy apartment, the memories of my past flooded back, painting a stark contrast to the present. I was the cherished only child of my parents, born after years of their struggling with infertility. Their joy knew no bounds when I came into their lives, a sentiment echoed in every childhood photo, every birthday celebration. Emily, you were always the center of our world, my mother used to say with a gentle smile. My parents, though not wealthy, spared no effort in providing for me. They encouraged my education, my love for reading, and nurtured my dreams. But with their sacrifice came an unspoken burden, the pressure to find happiness, to make their efforts worthwhile. Meeting Nathan seemed like fulfilling that unspoken promise. He was charming, attentive, and shared a similar background. An only child with aging parents. Our connection was instant, our conversations filled with laughter and shared aspirations. Our wedding was a joyous affair, celebrated with tears and blessings from both families. But the fairy tale started to crumble soon after. Nathan's true colors began to surface once the honeymoon phase faded. His sweet words turned into sharp commands, his once admiring glances now carried a hint of disdain. You need to be more efficient around the house, Emily. Look at how my mother managed everything despite her job, Nathan would often say, comparing me unfavorably to his mother. His relentless criticism wasn't just confined to household chores. He started controlling our finances, giving me a meager allowance, scoffing whenever I suggested I could return to work. Work? What for? You can barely manage the house, he'd sneer, his words cutting deeper each time. As I sat there, reminiscing, anger boiled within me. How had I not seen the signs? How had I allowed myself to become this person, a shadow of my former self, living in a loveless, controlling marriage? The realization was bitter, but it sparked a determination within me. I will not let this be my story, I whispered to myself, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time for Nathan to see the real Emily, the woman who wasn't just a beloved child or a submissive wife. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. The days turned into months, and the love that once seemed endless within the walls of our home slowly twisted into a suffocating trap. Each morning began with Nathan's cold demands echoing in the kitchen. Remember, Emily, dinner needs to be perfect. My colleagues are coming over tonight, Nathan would command, his tone leaving no room for protest. On one such evening, as I meticulously set the table for Nathan's guests, my hands trembled with suppressed anger. The sound of laughter and casual conversation filled the living room, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. Emily, this steak is slightly overcooked, Nathan commented loudly, in front of his colleagues, a smirk playing on his lips. His words, seemingly trivial, were a deliberate jab at my efforts. I forced a smile, replying, "I'll make sure it's better next time." But inside, I was screaming. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone who enjoyed belittling his wife, showcasing his dominance in this skewed power play we called our marriage. The evenings when Nathan's parents visited were even more challenging. They treated our home as their own, never acknowledging my efforts to make them comfortable. Nathan, on the other hand, would spare no expense to please them, often at the cost of our own needs. "Why can't we invite my parents sometimes?" I once dared to ask. Nathan's response was swift and harsh. "Why should I spend my money on your parents? They're not my responsibility." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the depth of Nathan's selfishness and disregard for me and my family. He had created a world where only his desires mattered, where I was nothing more than a silent participant in his scripted play of domestic bliss. But no more. The fire of rebellion was kindling within me. I was tired of being a mere puppet, tired of the disrespect and emotional torment. It was time for Nathan to see that I wasn't just his obedient wife. I was a woman with a voice, a woman who deserved respect. "I will not be broken," I whispered into the darkness, my resolve strengthening. The seeds of my plan were already taking root. Nathan had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The day my parents' house was caught in a devastating fire marked the beginning of my rebellion. The house, a symbol of my childhood memories, now stood partially destroyed. My parents, though safe, were shaken and disoriented. This was more than just a building, it was a repository of cherished memories and love. I remember standing amidst the charred remains, my mother's words echoing in my ears. "This house held so much of our life, Emily. Letting it go feels like losing a part of ourselves." That night, I lay awake, pondering over my parents' plight and my own stifled existence under Nathan's rule. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan not just to secure my parents' future, but also to free myself from Nathan's tyranny. The next day, I approached Nathan, my voice steady but laced with faux naivety. "Nathan, my parents' house? It's beyond repair. I was thinking of buying them a new one, using my savings." His reaction was predictably self-centered. "Your savings? Well, as long as it's not my money." But there was more to my plan than he knew. The house I was considering for my parents was under renovation, set to be a perfect ruse for my greater scheme. Weeks passed, and the day arrived to help my parents move. Nathan, believing the house to be a simple purchase, had no idea of the trap I was setting. His arrogance was my advantage. As I orchestrated the move, Nathan arrived unexpectedly, declaring ownership of the house and demanding a divorce. It was the moment I had been waiting for. "Fine, Nathan, you shall have your divorce," I said calmly, hiding the triumphant smile that threatened to break through. Little did he know, the house he so arrogantly claimed was not the real deal. The actual property, a modest but comfortable home, was waiting, its location a secret kept from Nathan. As I left with my parents, the look of confusion and defeat on Nathan's face was the first victory in my silent war against him. But it was just the beginning. The real retribution was yet to come. In the days following the move, I worked meticulously, my actions cloaked in secrecy. Nathan, oblivious to my intentions, basked in his perceived victory. It was time to unveil the truth and shatter his delusions. I recall the day vividly. Nathan had called, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, Emily, how does it feel to be back at your parents' old cramped house?" I smiled into the phone, a cold, calculated smile. "Actually, Nathan, we're quite comfortable. You see, the house you claimed was just a temporary arrangement. The real property is elsewhere, safe from your greed." There was a pause, a silence filled with his dawning realization. "What are you saying, Emily? That can't be." "Oh, but it is. And about the divorce papers you so kindly left for me, I've already filed them," I continued, my voice steady and strong. Nathan's reaction was a mix of confusion and anger, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant demeanor. "This isn't over, Emily. You can't just—" But I cut him off, no longer willing to endure his tirades. "It is over, Nathan, and let me remind you, I'm not just the meek housewife you thought you married. I am a lawyer, well-versed in the law. Your attempts to intimidate me are futile." His silence on the other end was the sweetest revenge, a validation of my newfound empowerment. The years of belittlement and control were coming to an end, and I was the orchestrator of his downfall. As I hung up the phone, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had turned the tables on Nathan, using his arrogance against him. It was a victory, not just for me, but for every moment I had felt insignificant in his shadow. The path ahead was clear. I would rebuild my life, free from Nathan's oppression, and stand tall, a woman reborn from the ashes of a marriage that had sought to diminish her. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. My phone buzzed, and Nathan's name flashed on the screen. Bracing myself, I answered, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and resolve. "Emily, this is madness. You can't do this to me." Nathan's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed and condescending tone. "Oh, but I can, and I have, Nathan," I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. "You thought you could walk over me, take what's mine, and discard me like I was nothing. You were wrong." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his mind as he tried to comprehend the gravity of his situation. "Emily, listen, we can work this out. Let's forget about the divorce and start over," he pleaded, his voice laced with false sweetness. The suggestion was laughable. "Start over? After everything you've done? No, Nathan. I deserve better, and so do my parents." I could feel his desperation through the phone. "But the house, my reputation, my career, you're ruining everything." "That's the consequence of your actions, Nathan. You chose this path when you underestimated me, when you treated me and my family with such disregard," I said firmly. The call ended with Nathan's pleas fading into a defeated silence. It was a victory, not just legally but morally and emotionally. I had stood up to the bully who had made my life miserable, and I had won. In the following weeks, Nathan's life unraveled. His attempts to control and manipulate had backfired, leaving him to face the harsh reality of his actions. His once flourishing career took a hit as the details of our divorce and his behavior became the talk of the town. As for me, I found solace in my parents' company, in the small yet comfortable home that was truly ours. I had reclaimed my life, emerging stronger and more determined. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel, free from the shadows of a loveless marriage. Sitting in the sunlit living room of the modest house that was now a sanctuary for my parents and me, I reflected on the tumultuous journey I had endured. The walls, freshly painted, seemed to symbolize a new beginning, a stark contrast to the oppressive walls of the house I once shared with Nathan. It had been several weeks since the divorce was finalized, and with each passing day, the weight of my past life lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and self-assuredness. Nathan's attempts to reach out had ceased, his once looming presence now just a distant memory. My parents, who had witnessed my transformation, were my pillars of strength. "We always knew you had this strength in you, Emily," my father said one evening, his eyes brimming with pride. I had returned to work, immersing myself in the world of law, a world where I was respected and valued for my intellect and skills. The stark contrast to my life with Nathan was both liberating and empowering, but it wasn't just about reclaiming my professional identity. It was about rediscovering who I was beyond the roles of daughter, wife, or victim. I was Emily, a woman of resilience and determination. One day as I sat in a cafe, lost in thought, a familiar face approached me. It was John, an old friend and colleague. "Emily, it's been a while. You look different, happier." His words made me realize how far I had come. "I am happier, John. I've come to understand that sometimes letting go is the first step to finding yourself." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and as he left, he said, "Let's not wait another lifetime to catch up again, Emily." As I walked back home, I felt a glimmer of something new, a possibility of a future that was mine to shape. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for new beginnings, for new love. But this time on my terms. The journey had been long and arduous, but as I stood in my parents' garden watching the sunset, I realized that every challenge had led me to this moment of tranquility and self-discovery. The shadows of my past had finally lifted, giving way to the warm, hopeful light of a new dawn.